Hello, my name's Jo Brett. I'm occupational therapist and CEO at Starjumps Children's Centre, and I'm here with Carrie Bartlett, who is a child and adolescent psychotherapist who's going to talk about what happens in a psychotherapy session with children and young people. This is carrying on from a talk we did last week, and is the second part of our two-part series. So, Carrie, can you tell us what does happen in a session?
So I think it's helpful to talk about the first session because that's a really important one when I'm first meeting children, introducing myself. It might well be the first time that they're in a therapy room with a psychotherapist, or it might be that they've had therapy before or a different kind of therapy before. So the first session is a really important one. And how I like to begin is, of course, introducing myself to them, letting them know what they can call me. They can call me Carrie. There's no need for Mrs. anything. And how we begin is we make what's known as a therapeutic agreement. So as I spoke about at length last week, the sessions are very child-led, but there does have to be a few boundaries in place. So the agreement is really focusing on putting those boundaries in place, agreeing on them in the beginning so that the child is emotionally and physically safe during their session. Younger children tend to prefer to draw or write down the agreement. Other children prefer to remember it. And what we agree on is the time and the day that we're going to meet and how long our sessions are going to be. Then we talk about confidentiality. So I try and phrase it in a way that's really age appropriate so that the child knows that this is a private space. And that's really the beginning building block, I think, for building up that therapeutic relationship, because they know that, I'm not going to be talking to their friends and their family about the things that we say and do in the sessions. But it's also really crucial that they know that there are limitations to that. So I explain, again, in an age appropriate way, in which circumstances I might have to let someone know that I was a little bit concerned. And then we agree that they can use the room in any way that they would like, as long as they're safe, I'm safe, and the room is safe, so that we understand the boundaries of safety. And finally, we agree together that we're going to tidy up at the end of the session together. And I think that's really important because it's a transition time where they're getting ready to go back to the outside world, to kind of carry on with their normal life. So by tidying up together, we're collaborating in that transition to be ready to go back into the outside world. After that, some children feel quite confident to have a look around the room. They might say, I want to play with this, or whatever takes their fancy. Other children might, and quite normally, feel a little bit anxious. And although they are child-led sessions, I don't want to leave anyone feeling lost or nervous. So I might suggest that we play a game of some kind, or if I see them looking at something, I might say, you look really interested in the art material. Is there something you'd like to draw? Is there something we could draw together? So that first session is really quite introductory, and it's the most directive session of the ones that we have. But I think it's really important that those therapeutic boundaries are put in place from the beginning, and that we just start to get to know each other a bit.
What happens if a child doesn't stick with the agreement and decides to do something that breaks the agreement?
Yeah, and that does happen. And I think it's really interesting because the therapeutic space is quite a unique space where the child is neither rewarded nor reprimanded for anything. So they're allowed to swear if they want to. They can make a huge mess. But if they are kind of pushing the boundaries of the agreement, I consider it to be all information. So perhaps if they were really struggling to end on time, I might understand that they really feel like they need this help and that it's difficult to end. Or if they wanted to end a session before 50 minutes, I might say, oh, it's been a really difficult session today and it's hard to stay in here because we're talking about some really painful things. So I try and use it as information and gives me some insight into what's going on for the child emotionally. If a session became unsafe, if there was some danger to the child or to me, then I would end the session. But again, we would pick it up next week and we would think about what happened there and what that was like for the child and try and really get to the bottom of what was going on. So actually the framework or the agreement is also a really useful tool in understanding what's going on for the child. Are they able to stick to it or not able to stick to it, and thinking about why.
Yeah. Thank you. You said it's adaptable for all ages. So can you talk a little bit about, for very young children, how a session might work? What sort of things do you do? Or would they choose to do? Do they just choose what they want to do?
Yeah, pretty much. Again, if they're struggling to get comfortable in the room, then I might help things along a bit. But for younger children, so thinking about kind of primary age up to preteen, sometimes early teenagers like to use the resources in the room, and that's completely fine. But we have a range of resources that are all specifically chosen for the qualities that they have, because psychodynamic psychotherapy is about symbolic communication. So the things that we have in the room are very specifically chosen. So we have things like bricks and a lot of art material. We have sand and water. And I brought some things, actually. We have a doll's house. And we also have sort of multi-generational dolls. I can show you. So as you can see, they're quite bland, they're quite neutral. And the reason for that is because the child can then project onto them whatever they want them to be. So these aren't necessarily representing their actual grandma. It could be just an older person in their life. It could be me. It could be a school friend. And again, these don't have to stay in the doll's house. They can go in the sand, they can go in the water. But it's sort of my job to tease apart what it is that the child is trying to communicate on a deeply symbolic level. We also have some animals. So we have wild and domestic animals. So we have a little pig, like a baby pig. And can you see that?
Yes.
And that could perhaps represent a very vulnerable part of the child's self. It could represent a baby that they know or somebody more vulnerable that they know. But we also have things like an elephant, which could represent like a strong maternal figure, either that's in their internal world or actually exists. So perhaps if, I don't know, the little pig ran to the elephant to get some help, I would understand that the child believes that help is possible. And we also have some wild animals, like a tiger, which can represent children's fears or worries or things like that. So what I'm aiming to do is to work very symbolically with the child. So I might say, oh, the baby pig is scared of the scary tiger that's coming. He's worried he's going to get buried. And what that does is it sort of keeps the interaction once removed from the child's actual experience and makes it incredibly safe and helps the unconscious become conscious, but in a way that isn't too abrupt, that it is kept within the metaphor and very, very symbolic. The last thing that younger children have is they're each given an individual box. So quite a simple, bland box. And that's for them to put, if they made something out of Play-Doh or if they did any artwork, then we would put it in there. And they're made aware that that's private, no one else looks in it. But also that I will keep that safe during the week. So again, we're symbolically communicating that they can leave the session with me, perhaps leave their worries, leave whatever it is that's going on for them with me, and I will keep it safe. And it's another way of, again, helping them transition back out of the room. When things are taken in and out of the room, it can kind of blur those lines between the therapy space and the outside world. And their interaction with the box as well tells me a lot. Some like to decorate it. You know, if it's so full that I can't close the box, I might understand that this child is really overwhelmed and that there's a lot going on that's difficult to contain. And so everything in the room is very deliberately chosen and has symbolic significance.
So can I ask, so at the start, when a child comes in and they might start, say, playing with the doll's house, and then move some of the figures over to the sand tray, perhaps, would you be asking any questions? How do you interact with them as they're playing, or are you just watching to see what they do?
So that kind of depends on, firstly, where the child is at. So although they chronologically might be 9 years old, they might be functioning at a much younger level, and I need to be thinking about where they're at. It also depends where our therapy journey is at. So at the very beginning, it can begin with me just saying, oh, you've moved Daddy Doll into the sand and he's got buried, and just sort of narrating what I'm seeing, and that then might develop into, I wonder what it's like for Daddy to be buried in the sand. And so I'm slowly building up the interpretation, which can take time. Or some children respond really well to an interpretation, so I might feel they're ready for a slightly deeper interpretation. Some children want me to play. And so I'd be playing alongside them and talking about what I feel is going on in the room, or, you know, where should baby go? Is he safe in his cot, or is he left outside the house? Where should baby go? So yeah, it's quite a technique to sort of figure out where
Yes.
that.
Not one answer to that.
No, but something that I'm thinking about all of the time.
Yeah. So what about teenagers? What sort of things might you do with teenagers, for example?
So for teenagers, it tends to be more conversation-based. Again, they're welcome to use the room if they want to, but they do tend to be more conversation-based. But the emphasis is still on symbolic communication. So they very often, I suppose if you're a fly on the wall in our session, it might look like we're not talking about anything, because they often talk about books that are interesting to them or TV characters. But what I'm trying to do is find out what is it that's really significant about what they're bringing to me. So if there's a TV character or a show that they're really interested in, I might be wondering, is there something about this character's story they identify with? And is there parallels with the story that sort of echo in their own life? Who are the heroes? Who are the villains of the piece? And that would tell me a lot about what's going on for them. And really what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, is take everything I know about the child from what the parents have told me, from the referral process and assessment process, through sort of bringing those threads together into a sort of fine tapestry of what their internal world looks like, and really working on thinking and linking with them. And again, slowly, perhaps after a few sessions, might say, oh, Harry Potter reminds me of you a little bit, and I wonder what you think about that. But again, when the teenager feels ready to do that, I don't give teenagers a box. That sort of sense of safety and things being held is sort of represented by the room at that point. So at that level, it can be seen in the room. Yeah.
Might they do art or drawings as well as part of their session?
Yeah, some teenagers do. Again, it's totally up. So the room is still left exactly how it would be for a younger child. So they're absolutely welcome to even play with the doll's house if that's what they would like to do. For the artwork, I think if a teenager did begin to do it, I would probably find a folder that we could keep it safe, or I would offer them a box if that's, how they were spending sessions. Yeah.
So they wouldn't take that home with them at the end of the session?
No.
What about when you finish the therapy? Does that stay with you?
When I
drawing? Yes, when they're, yeah.
So what I like to do is give them the choice. So I often have their box or their artwork or whatever, and on the last session, and it's something I would be thinking about leading up to the end, and kind of working out with them what they would feel is helpful. Usually, what I do is say, would you like to take some things from your box to remember our time together, and I will keep the rest safe. And so it's quite a nice sort of, it's something physical and transitional that they can take with them to really remember our time. And I spoke last week about the idea of therapy being carried with you across the life course. So taking something I think is really, really nice, but then also leaving something with me. There is a sense that I'll carry on to look after that.
Yeah, that's nice. A parent has asked, can they come into the room with their child?
That's always an interesting question. And I think I would be wondering about the circumstances. I think first and foremost, the sessions are a protected space for the children. And confidentiality is at the very heart of what we do. So I think my opinion would be, on that basis, we could find something like, for instance, at Star Jumps, we have a waiting area that's upstairs. If that felt more comfortable, they could wait up there. That's right next to the therapy room. If it was that their child was struggling to come into the room, we could certainly agree sort of 5 minutes, you come in, perhaps we could play a game together, and then we say goodbye to mum. But it is really a prerequisite of psychotherapy that at some point the child is able to separate from mum or dad. So it's certainly something to consider, but I think really the sessions need to be protected for the child.
Last week you mentioned you offer 3 sort of introductory sessions. Are these different from a usual session, or are they 3 similar to what would carry on from there?
I think for all intents and purposes, they look exactly the same. So the same resources are out, it's the same length of time. The agreement is exactly the same, but I think what's different would be my own thinking. So because this is a chance for me to get to know the child and for them to get to know me, really what I'm aiming to do is to make sure, absolutely sure, that this is the right support service for them. So I would be perhaps seeing how they react or are able to tolerate an interpretation. I would be perhaps wondering a little more about what their relationship with their family, with their friends, with themselves is like, getting a little bit insight into what defense mechanisms they might be using, and certainly assessing any high risk behavior or anything that comes out of that. So if we're kind of into the 3rd session and I notice they haven't spoken about their friends, I might say, you haven't told me a lot about your friends yet. I'm wondering, who do you go to school with? So I might be a little bit more directive to kind of try and, again, it's that fine tapestry. So I'm trying to find out kind of about every aspect of their life, really. So really it's my thinking that's a little bit different, but for the child, it looks much like a therapy session.
Okay. And you mentioned before that you like to work closely with parents. So how do parents work closely with you, and how can they support the psychotherapy when they're not coming into the room, and that, they maybe don't fully appreciate what's happening in a session?
Yeah.
You talked about having regular reviews, but are there ways that parents can support week to week?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think that's a really valuable question to ask, because parents are the ones who are supporting their children in between our sessions, and they're also supporting their children by bringing them. As I said, I think psychotherapy is quite a unique space, and very often parents haven't had therapy themselves, so it's a bit confusing about, you know, what is it we do, and, you know, how can I support my child. I think if we think about from the very beginning, from when the referral is made, after I've met the parents, and if they feel that I could be the right therapist for their child, and so I'm then going to meet the child, I think it would be really helpful to talk to the children about why the referral's been made. Sometimes children have asked for it themselves, so they might be really aware of why they're coming to see me. Other times there might be a little bit of confusion. Why am I going to see this lady? What's it for? So perhaps just saying to them, you know, it could be helpful to get some, you know, get some help with the nightmares you're having, or it might be helpful to have a safe place to think about why you self-harm. So really letting them know why the referral has happened. And I think particularly at the beginning of therapy, bringing your child to a session, you know, there's generally a transition either from the home to the therapy space, or from school to Star Jumps. And I think thinking about how your child might be feeling during that time, and recognizing that I don't think it will be just one thing. They might be feeling nervous, but also kind of excited, hey, I get to play with those bricks again, or hopeful that therapy is going to be helpful in some way. And putting that into words, you know, parents know their children best. So if they are looking a little bit nervous, you could say to them, you know, you're looking a little nervous. Is it because we're going to therapy? And creating that transition time, or using that transition time to create a space where they can talk about how they're feeling if they want. One thing I do offer is that if the child wants to come in prior to their first session, just have a look around the room and say hello for 10 minutes, then that can be arranged. So I think parents kind of asking for what they think will help their child is always really useful. I think there's a few things that you could avoid as well. I think perhaps saying to your child, have fun at therapy, it's almost like an automatic thing we do when we say goodbye to our children. But I think therapy is not always fun. In fact, it's often quite tricky, or can be quite painful. And so by not saying that, it avoids the child becoming confused as to why they're not having fun in therapy. It's actually really hard work. So, or I think directing or trying to direct what they should talk about. As I said, we work with symbolic play or symbolic communication for the very reason that it feels emotionally safe. So saying to your child, tell them about your self-harm, or tell them about your nightmare, that can put a lot of pressure on the work, I think. And we're always working at the child's pace, really. There's practical support that parents can do, bringing them on time, or letting me know ahead of time if there's any change to the schedule, so that I can really think about that with the child, if there's going to be a holiday or something like that. Yeah.
So if a question we've had is, if there is a holiday that the family have and some sessions are going to be missed, does that create a problem, or is it okay?
I actually think it's really helpful. I think that having a break gives space and time for children and teenagers to really let the therapeutic work digest, let it percolate. We all need a break from hard work, and therapy is just that. What I would say, and I think I spoke about this last week, what I would say is letting your child's therapist have plenty of notice where possible. As I said last week, I like to make calendars so that it's really clear when we're going to have a break. So as much notice so that we can work towards it, and it can be really managed, is helpful.
If a child wants to miss a session, what should a parent do if a child is resisting coming?
Again, a really interesting question. And I think it links really with what I was saying earlier about everything being information. So I think it's really important that children and teenagers feel that they have agency and autonomy over their therapy work. If they did want to miss a session, you might come out of school and just be like, "Hey, mom, dad, I'm really not feeling it today." It may well be that we've had a really difficult session that's been very full and full of really difficult things the week before. And so taking a break is needed to just decompress, digest, let everything process. And then they could come back the next week. So whenever a child misses a session, that slot is still held for them. That's their time. So I would be using that time, whether they're there or not, to think about them. So I might be reflecting on our last session and wondering how that might be feeling for them, and if that's a reason that they don't want to come. I think for some parents, because obviously we have a cancellation policy, and I think for some parents it can feel as if, the money's being wasted, but I would say actually that's an important communication from the child. If it was happening a lot, I think that's something then that we would need to reflect on with both the child and the parents, and really try and understand what's going on there. But I think once every now and then, the most important thing is that they feel that they have some control over their work, and that it's their choice. Yeah.
We did have a question posed to us from a parent. After a session, my child can be very quiet. Why?
Why? That's
what can I do to help?
What can you do?
Yeah.
I think there's lots of different types of quiet. It might be that the child is feeling that some things have come up and they feel that they need to give it some thought. Again, it could be that they're tired. Like I said, it's quite hard work. I think to help them, I think what I would suggest is to name it, to say you seem really quiet after your session with Carrie, and perhaps give them a choice. Do you want to talk about it, or perhaps do you just want to be left alone for a bit? Is there something you need for comfort? And I think in doing that, you're respecting that this is a private time for the child, that confidentiality is really important. They don't have to report back. Of course, it's up to them if they want to. But I think by giving them a choice to talk about it or to stay quiet really respects that boundary. But they'll also know that their parent's thinking of them and is concerned, or just thinking, holding them in mind.
Yeah. And do you often see change in children's behaviour during a course of therapy?
Yeah. So hopefully there is a decrease of some of the more unhelpful behaviours that might be the reason that they were referred for. But very often there can be quite sort of pronounced peaks and troughs. So you might see quite speedy improvement, and then that's followed by a very temporary decline in behaviour. And I think what it's important to remember is that the therapeutic road was never smooth. It is rocky. And so while deeply unconscious things are being brought to the surface, sometimes very painful things are being thought about, this can sometimes spill out of the therapy room. I think if you're ever concerned, then it's best to contact the therapist and kind of talk about it. But I think being prepared for behaviour changes, both the good and the temporary, sometimes even quite regressive behaviours. But I think also having faith in the therapy process and knowing that this is a safe, it is a safe intervention and it is being held properly by the therapist is really important too.
What sort of regressive behaviours might you see, say, in a young child, could you expect from like if they were to display that during the course of the therapy?
I think tantrums is probably the most common. I would be concerned about anything more pronounced like bedwetting. I think that's something that would really need to be thought about. But I think throwing tantrums, because a lot of things are coming up to the surface, and one thing at home might sort of trigger a response that seems very young for a 7, 8-year-old. But really what they're looking for perhaps is a cuddle from mom or dad, or just looking for some comfort, really. So I think tantrums are quite common.
Yeah, and you can imagine how that manifests in perhaps a teenager.
Yeah. Yes.
Slamming a door or something.
That's a great example. Slamming a door, claiming that they hate everyone, and sitting in their room. It's very common.
Yes. So how often would you meet with parents and keep them updated with what's happening and how things are going?
Yeah, so at the beginning of our time, I meet with parents at the very beginning, and then after our 3 sessions, I meet with them again. After that, I like to meet with them every 6 weeks, but I always let the child know. So I would be saying, I'm going to be meeting with mummy or daddy or both on Wednesday. Is there anything you would like me to share? So the child's very involved in that. As our work sort of, as we settle into it, sometimes I extend those reviews to 12 weeks as we're kind of settling into it. Personally, I'm always available via email, or get in touch with me at Star Jumps if a conversation needs to happen in between. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us, Carrie? Because we've had a half-hour chat, and it's been really helpful to understand a bit more about what happens in a session and how parents can support. But is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think I really hope it's been helpful to kind of give a little more, demystify the process of psychotherapy and what happens in a session. I think what I would say is, if you do have any concerns about your child or adolescent, then it's best to reach out and have a think with a therapist about it. Because I really believe in the work that we do, and I think I've seen many children find it helpful.
Absolutely, they do. I know that. Thank you so much, Carrie. It's been really interesting talking to you, and I've just put up a message there that if you do want more information, please email info@starjumps, and we can put you in touch with Carrie. And thank you for joining us, and have a good day. Bye.
Hi, everyone.